wanted to make a video about Malcolm X, Malik al-Hajj Shabazz, otherwise known as Omawale, otherwise known as Satan, otherwise known as born Malcolm Little, and more popularly known as Malcolm X. He would have been 100 years today, May the 19th, 1925. I wanted to raise a few issues and highlights about his life, his commitment, revolutionary commitment to fighting colonialism and that of his family. And where I'm placed today is actually quite fitting. I'm at the quote-unquote Royal Botanical Kew Gardens, which is a British colonial global centre of monopolization of the wealth of the land by means of plants, etc. And that's what the colonialist is out to do, is to monopolize the planet, our labor, our people, and our wealth, including our natural wealth. So Malcolm X came from a revolutionary family. His mother was born in Grenada in the 1890s. She came to the USA when she was about 20 years old, and her uncle introduced her into joining the pan-Africanist organization of Marcus Garvey, the UNIA, the United Negro Improvement Association. Malcolm X himself used to say how proud he was to go around with his father, Earl Little, to go to political meetings, because his father was also a known activist in the UNIA of Marcus Garvey as well. And so Malcolm X comes from a revolutionary family. It has to be also mentioned that Louise Little, she was from Grenada in the Caribbean, came to the USA when she was 20. She was a daughter of two Nigerians who were enslaved by European colonialists, and her light skin came as a result, most likely, it's said in research, by means of a violent sexual rape, which also then obviously gave Malcolm his relatively light complexion and hair. He was known as Detroit Red at one point when he was in Detroit as a bad boy, rude boy, with the zoot suits and all of that. So it's important to understand the revolutionary nature of the family, because there was many a time in revolutionary struggle, it's actually predicated on revolutionary networks of revolutionary families and the way they committed to the struggle. And it's important to remember in that, it's important to stay loyal to the revolutionary nature of the family, i.e. a blood family or a proverbial one. After the 1960s, a lot of revolutionary families weren't so revolutionary anymore, which speaks to the relative corruption, the collapse of our struggle. So Malcolm himself becomes recruited into the radical black internationalist organization and also cult of Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam, while he's in prison. He was known as Satan when he was in prison. He was recruited into the Nation of Islam, the NOI, by his brothers. Speaks to that, again, the revolutionary nature of the family. There's a few other things I want to highlight about Malcolm X, really, before this video is over, which is the consistent running thread throughout Malcolm's life. Malcolm X, like Walter Rodney in the Caribbean, like Steve Biko in South Africa, and like Abdurrahman Babu, who, by the way, Malcolm X was a close comrade of in East Africa, Zanzibar, etc., and like the Mau Mau, which my own paternal grandfather was a direct comrade of the Kimati of the Mau Mau, which Malcolm X, by the way, was a fervent supporter of. And the Mau Mau at the time were fighting British colonialism in Kenya, the Kikuyu resistance, and they were some of the most demonized and criminalized revolutionary movements on the planet. And not only did Malcolm X support them, he says we need a Mau Mau in Mississippi, we need a Mau Mau in Harlem and in the USA. So the point I'm trying to make here, and just to hone in on it, is in all of these regions, the main thing the colonialists want to divide is African and Asian people from each other. And like Walter Rodney, like Steve Biko, like these revolutionaries, Malcolm X was a firm believer, was dedicated to uniting African and Asian people, and that's what he did. And he says all the non-white people across the world are all part of the black nation, the international black nation, which is the black internationalism in part of the Nation of Islam and Elijah Muhammad, which is interesting despite its limitations and problems. So that's really important, and that's important because it's something that a lot of people have become very hostile to and out of fashion, but this core revolutionary leadership of ours has always advocated towards that. Not least Malcolm X, when he came to England, this is very significant. Malcolm X was hosted by the Pakistani-led Islamic societies of students. He was hosted by Bengalis. This is all documented. He visited Smethwick in West Midlands just days before his martyrdom, in which he was advocating and he was moving around with African, Caribbean and Asian heritage people. And he actually said that it's so important in England that these communities work together against a common oppressor, and he had that framework globally as well. So that's really significant, especially in the context where people are internalizing really toxic colonial divisions, and all the old racist tropes are all back with a vengeance. It's important to go back and to understand that Malcolm X stood on that. But also in internationalism, you have to understand that Malcolm X always heavily leaned into the most radical wings of the global movement, particularly against French colonialism, British colonialism, and USA obviously as well. And that's indicated by, like I said, his repeated support of the Mau Mau, which was actually known as the Land and Freedom Party in Kenya. But he also supports the resistance in Congo against the colonial tool Shombe after the killing and martyrdom of Patrice Lumumba there. He supports the Vietnamese resistance. He supports the resistance of the black revolutionaries in South Africa, etc. So what he's saying is, as well, he's saying that if you're going down a capitalistic route, you're going down a quote-unquote vulturistic route. Show me a capitalist and I'll show you a bloodsucker. Direct quote from Malcolm X. He said the new independent countries that are moving towards more socialistic forms of governance is the things to watch out for. And I think that's all reported in his, it's all reflected directly in his arguably most important speech, Message to the Grassroots. And so that's important because today it's a very strange situation where people are trying to spin right-wing capitalist comprador military dictatorships in the Sahel, for example, as somehow good for African people, although they're involved with the new colonialists, swapping the French for the Russians and massacring whole communities of Tuareg and Fulani. Malcolm X is very clear on these things. No, the struggle is for land. The struggle is for control socialistically of the land that the colonialists have stolen in alliance with the comprador collaborating class. And that reminds me, Malcolm X was so militant and clear against the sellout, against the Uncle Tom. So you can see that in the struggle against colonialism by so-called quote-unquote third world countries and people, you have two wings of the struggle. That wing which is ready to compromise with the colonialists directly or deceitfully or manipulatively, but they're ready to compromise and to sell out the people. And that wing, which is the militant wing, which says, no, we continue our revolutionary resistance until total liberation. And that reflected a global network of these two different wings. One which was ready to compromise and to benefit and sell out the masses, and that which wanted to continue the militant struggle and complete total liberation. And you know, that global radical network hardly exists anymore, and some of its last elements was the Fenian struggle, which has been largely destroyed by the British, which is the peasant revolutionary guerrillas in Colombia, which has largely been destroyed by colonialists and their comprador class in Colombia, etc., and so forth. And also it is represented by the largely destroyed Lebanese Hezbollah as well. And of course we have to reference that Malcolm X was in support of the Palestinian guerrillas and resistance. Indeed, he visited Gaza himself because he was a frequent traveler to Egypt as a guest and an envoy to Gamal Abdel Nasser, the revolutionary, anti-British revolutionary of Egypt. By his first trip there was in 1959. So these are some really significant and important things that Malcolm X stood for, which arguably are perhaps largely forgotten and erased, etc., which is understandable because we live in such counter-revolutionary times. So I wanted to share a few things on the day of Malcolm X's 100th birthday. And, you know, he was a great figure. There's so much more to say. There's so much more, his links to Robert F. Williams, and the way he inspired the black militant struggle, anti-colonial struggle in USA, leading to the daughters and sons of Malcolm's picking up the gun and going for the colonialists and the greatest revolutionary upsurge, arguably, in the USA of the 20th century of the Black Panther Party, etc. Big up Malcolm X. He lives forever.